occupied for some time now in developing a charcuterie board that's based on a cutting board design that I actually showed on a video not so long ago that had a wine glass on the board. Now I've added some design functions to it, and because it's going to be a charcuterie board, I'm planning on putting a film finish on it, and I expect it to be very much a presentation type object, not meant to be cut on with a sharp knife. That's a different finish on the board altogether. And part of that process is to sand and sand and sand. And I have had no organized manner of keeping my sandpaper together, as shown here. Now, I've gotten sidetracked to build a small cabinet where all of my sandpapers can go with drawers to their own particular grits, and that's what this video was about. Okay, here's my 2021 issue. In 1980 this would have been a problem, but for some reason the political police have decided that problem is not a word that we use anymore. So this is an issue. I've got this pile of my abrasives, which include my blocks, and as I said previously, they run up from 60 grit to I think 6,000 grit. I do a lot of metal polishing as well as wood sanding, and I really want to get these things organized, and it's driving me nuts. For those of you who've been watching for a while, you know that my shop looks like it's completely disorganized, but in fact I can find just about anything in it very quickly because everything has a place. It's hard to believe it looks like a junk heap. But in fact, what I'm thinking about doing for my sandpaper is based on this. So I've decided that I'm going to make the drawers first and then design and build a cabinet based on how that works out. I think I've got my plan here, and what I'm looking for is an interior dimension of 10 inches wide, 13 inches front to back, and so that means and I'm building that to my sandpaper commercial box that the paper comes in, and that's 9.5 inches. So my 10 inches is pretty important to make sure that I get that size, because that's not leaving me a lot of room on the sides. And it's 12 inches I think, so it's a little more freedom front to back. So, and I really don't need these to be very deep. I'm going to cut these sides to 1.5 inches, and then I'm going to put a saw curve down in the bottom and put hardboard bottoms in them. And I'm just going to make butt joints, with pins and glue. Should work out fine. So the 14-inch sides are going to be the full dimension, and then the 10-inch will butt into those sides. So I have a piece of plywood here that is a new type of plywood to me. It feels very much like hardwood as opposed to Baltic birch, but it's very dimensionally stable. It doesn't appear to have any voids at all. I got this out of Lowe's, just looking at what they had and cut down sizes. And this is a 2 foot wide, and it's almost perfectly 2 feet and 4 feet long. And what I'm going to do is change over the blade in my saw, table saw,
to a narrow blade, and that will pretty closely give me my 14 inches from one side, which will be this side, because I've already put a little kerf right there just to measure it out, and this will be a perfect 10, and this is going to work out to be almost a perfect 14. Unfortunately, it isn't quite long enough, so I have to take a piece of another board off to make up for all of the 20 pieces that I need to make 10 drawers. Okay, here I'm changing back to my full kerf blade, which is an 1/8 inch, and quite inaccurately an 1/8 inch. And once I get that all in place, I'm going to set it so that I can take off a 1 inch or 3/16 inch plow in the bottom edge of each of the sides, and that way it'll perfectly accommodate the masonite or the hardboard, which is just slightly less than 1/8 of an inch. Okay, my blade is up 3/16 to an inch now, and I'm also making the clearance 3/16 of an inch. I think that will be adequate to hold onto the hardboard and still give me plenty of room to store the sandpaper in. Okay, I'm happy to say that test fit works very well, so that the size of that bottom is real good. So we can finish this one up. And that's just how I want that piece of sandpaper to fit in there.
Well, I've worked out the plan for the cabinet based upon the size of the drawers, and I must say that I was pretty accurate making these drawers, almost exactly the size that I had anticipated. And quite honestly, it isn't always the case. Certainly no more than a 32nd of an inch off, and front to back and side to side, which was pretty accurate for me. And the height was the same. So now I know that my cabinet is going to be an open front, and I will remind you that this is purely utilitarian. There's nothing fancy about the boxes, and I don't plan on prettying them up. And that's pretty much the way the cabinet is going to be. This is going to be hung on my basement wall with a French cleat, and I want it to hold paper, and it doesn't need to be made out of really tricky looking hardwoods. So it's going to be 14.5 inches front to back, and it's going to be made out of this same 1/2 inch plywood that I got out of Lowe's that is called white face, I believe. And I can't find anything else about it, but it seems to have a fairly hard outer layer. And as I got to making a lot of cuts on it, I did find that it had some voids, but nothing really catastrophic, so they cover up pretty well. The cabinet's going to be 18 3/8 inches tall. And the separators between the drawers are going to be that 1/8 inch thick masonite set into kerfs, so that there's going to be very little wasted space inside of this cabinet. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be no stress on those masonite shelf holders, if you call it that, or drawer holders. And I think this is going to work out just fine. And again, this is mostly just accurate cutting and good setup and preparation for getting the most out of your plywood sheets.
My next operation is a very fiddly one, and this is just a corner of my planning drawing. And what this indicates is a 1/8 inch kerf that the masonite is going to sit in. And you can see from what happened over here that I started off with the wrong idea. This is the area where the drawer will sit, the small box that the papers are going to sit in. And I started drawing it without having the 1/2 inch plywood bottom in there. So I had to recalculate this whole thing. And this has to be a pretty close to right spot on, 2 1/4 from the bottom of the case right here to the top of the kerf. So I'm going to run this side along the fence on the table saw, and that edge of the kerf is got to be precisely measured 2 1/4 inches to the left hand side of the blade. And then the next step up is going to be there. And of course I have to run both sides through at the same time before I reposition the fence, or they won't be lined up correctly no matter what I do. If I move them and then try to put it back, there's probably no way I'm going to get it lined up properly. So start off with the fence being 2 1/4 inches away from the left hand side of the blade, and then start walking it up 1 3/4 inches until we hit the very top. And there are
Well, I'm pretty happy with those. Okay, I'm about ready to start gluing things up, and what I've got here are the two sides, and I've got the bottom side against the bottom side, and I'm going to glue these up. These masonite strips have a very slick flat side and a very rough side, so I want to make sure that when I put these in that I've got the slick side up, so that as using the drawer, it's not going to encounter any resistance to the rough side. I'm also going to want to place these strips up against the front. I'm going to call these the back, and I want those up against the front because the back is going to run along here, so there's going to be a little bit of space, which is immaterial to the job that these strips have to do, but I don't want to make the mistake of getting them in the way of putting the back on. Okay, I'm going to put on the back at this point. And that is just lining up these edges with those edges. It's a little bit easier than trying to put on the sides. I wanted to show you what I've got now that the carcass is all put together and the drawers are pretty well along. There's a bunch of sanding and coating with something, I'm not quite sure. But what I want to point out is that I built in an 1/8 of an inch slop in case things got out of hand, and they didn't. I ended up with exactly an 1/8 of an inch. And if that had happened, I had planned on putting some shims in each side, and I cut some very small shims to take up most of that slack. In fact, they only measure 90/1000ths of an inch thick. There's still a little bit of slack in there, a little bit of slop. But I'm just going to super glue those into place, and that much better centers the drawers, so it won't drive me nuts looking at them being all crooked. Well, it looks like I've changed my mind again. Typically speaking, I'm not really a big fan of making functional stuff in my basement for my basement shop to look pretty. I much prefer to take function over form, and things abound within my shop that are just functional. This is not a retail location where I need to impress people with what I do. And I was not going to put any fronts on these drawers. I was going to put a coat of paint on it. And then I put up an Instagram saying exactly what I just said, that I wasn't going to put any fronts on it. And then I got one sarcastic viewer came back and said, oh no, I got to put highly figured wood on the front and all that sort of stuff. And I appreciated the humor in that, and that it was most likely a sarcastic comment, because I believe that that's his nature as well. However, I was poking around in my odds and ends corner, and I came up with this piece here, which was a study I did at least 15 years ago, possibly longer, in resawing a figured piece of cherry and then putting the book matches together in a way that was semi-artistic. And because I was gluing end grain to end grain, I had to put this spine back here. And now with that spine, I have found nothing to do with this except have it sit in my odds and ends bin for at least 20 years with no purpose being there. Except that I just looked at it and decided, whoa, that looks like it might be just right if I slice that back spine off. And by George, it's only about 3/8 of an inch too long if I cut it right at the spine. So I can actually cut that center section out and apply the fronts to the drawers, and it'll look nicer. And it's already made. So I'm going to do that. Well, what I'm going to do here is cut from side to side so that they're at the exact dimension to fit the drawer. And then I'm going to start cutting from the center, because the very top and the very bottom one are going to be different sizes from the other 8 drawers. And I'll fit the bottom and the top to having the other 8 installed and spaced correctly. I think if you look right here, I've got these measured out very accurately to the center of that piece, to the center of that piece. And the way I'm working this is that the bottom of the drawer defines the location of the faceplate. And that's the way it's going to be on all of them. Getting pretty close now. What I will be doing is adding some small pulls, but before that I'm going to sand everything up, and once it's all sanded I'll apply the pulls, and it's going to be a very simple little flat piece of wood, and paint up the body and then put some shellac or some coating on here.
At this point, the cabinet is ready to use if it was just to sit on a flat surface. However, I intend to hang this on a wall over my scrap wood corner, and I'm going to use this leftover piece of oak flooring that's been sitting in my scrap bin for years. So I'm happy to have a use for that finally. And a French cleat means that there is a top piece with a 45-degree cut going in this direction, and a bottom piece attached to the wall with a 45-degree cut, and they interact with each other to manage to hold it against the wall, and the cabinet does not have to be permanently attached. The other thing that I still need to do is on the free side, and this, in this case, facing the front of the cabinet would be this. I'm going to attach this old hacksaw blade right along the edge there, a couple of screws, maybe 3 screws, and that's how I cut my sandpaper very easily. You just put it across there and give it a quick rake downward, and you get a perfectly straight cut, and you don't have to take out scissors and horse around with a knife or something like that. So those are the last couple of things that I need to do, and then I'll put all the paper in and get back to work on the things that I was sanding before. Now, I suspect that the discussion of what a French cleat is with my audience isn't particularly important. But what I've done here is cut that oak board in half, basically in half, at a 45-degree angle, and screwed it on to the back of the case in that orientation. This piece is attached to the wall, and when you put them together, it stays on the wall very strongly, just so that you can see where things are located in the shop. The sandpaper cabinet is right inside the front door, finished here, and looking pretty spiffy compared to what I would usually put in. I do in fact have papers in drawers that are appropriate. Some drawers are empty, need to be filled. Work very easily. What I didn't mention any time earlier is that the drawer bottoms and the drawer slides have a coat of paste wax on them. Not that they need them, because the drawers are so light it doesn't matter. Up on top, I've got a variety of my sanding blocks that I like to use, and that's a good place to store them. But I'm real happy to be organized for a change. And thanks for watching. And if you care to, I wouldn't mind a like, and it would be very helpful if you shared this, because YouTube is trying to kill my channel, and I don't understand why.